It was one of those glittering nights in the heart of the city, the kind of evening where crystal chandeliers glowed against the marble walls of the most expensive restaurant, where only the elite, the powerful, and the feared dared to dine. And among them sat Victoria Langford, a billionaire known not only for her ruthless business empire but also for her icy demeanor, her sharp eyes scanning the room as if she owned it. Because in truth she did. Every handshake, every deal, every whisper of influence eventually traced back to her name. But tonight something unexpected, something life-changing, something terrifying was about to unfold in front of her eyes. And it would begin with the quiet entrance of a teenage boy, a black teen no older than 15, dressed far too modestly for such a place, his crisp white shirt neatly tucked into a pair of worn trousers, his vest a little too big as though it had been borrowed, and his gaze steady yet strangely familiar to anyone who dared look long enough. But nobody paid him attention at first, because all eyes were always on Victoria. And then suddenly, as the waiter poured wine and the orchestra played soft jazz in the corner, the doors of the restaurant were slammed open with a crash that silenced the music, and 4 men in black tactical gear stormed in, masks covering their faces, weapons raised with cold precision, and gasps rippled across the dining hall as patrons ducked, glasses shattered, chairs toppled, and the screams of the wealthy filled the air while the 4 men shouted commands for everyone to stay still, their guns trained not on the crowd but directly on Victoria. Because this was not a random attack, this was a targeted strike, the kind that comes when someone with too much power has stepped on too many enemies. And Victoria, though startled, did not flinch, her eyes narrowing as if trying to calculate who had sent them, who dared to cross her in such a public display. But before she could even open her mouth, the boy who had slipped into the restaurant earlier stood up slowly, his small hands raised in the air, and in that moment the gunmen hesitated for a fraction of a second, their weapons twitching as though uncertain, and Victoria, watching from her chair, felt a chill run down her spine because she realized the boy was not afraid, not trembling, not cowering like the others. Instead, he looked directly into the eyes of the men with a strange defiance. And then the leader of the masked group barked, "Move aside, kid. This isn't your business." But the boy didn't move. He stepped forward, placing himself directly between the billionaire and the men. And for reasons unknown, none of them pulled the trigger, their gloved fingers hovering near but not pressing down, as though something about the boy froze them in place. And whispers spread across the room as the wealthy guests peeked from behind overturned tables, trying to understand who this boy was and why 4 armed men, ruthless by every appearance, would hesitate at the sight of him. And Victoria, who prided herself on never showing weakness, found herself whispering under her breath, "Who are you?" But the boy didn't answer her, not yet. He kept his eyes fixed on the gunman, his voice calm, yet carrying a weight beyond his years as he finally spoke. "You don't want to do this." And there was something chilling in his tone, something that carried both authority and sorrow, something that made even Victoria's heart pound, because it was the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had seen too much, survived too much, someone with a story far deeper than his youthful face suggested. And the gunmen, though still holding their weapons, glanced at one another nervously, as though silently debating whether to proceed. But the leader snarled, trying to shake off whatever doubt had gripped him. "Step aside or we'll end you too." Yet his voice lacked the firmness it carried earlier, betraying the unease gnawing at him. And the boy, still calm, still steady, replied, "You think you know who you're facing, but you don't." And Victoria's mind raced because the boy spoke not like a teenager, but like a man far older, someone who understood power, danger and fear, and suddenly flashes of recognition flickered in her eyes, though she couldn't quite place it, like she had seen him somewhere before, maybe in a file, maybe in a headline, maybe in a moment buried deep in her past. But before her thoughts could settle, the gunmen repositioned, circling, their weapons now aimed not only at Victoria but also at the boy. And the entire room held its breath, waiting for the next second to erupt in violence. And then, almost as if the universe itself paused, the boy lowered his hands slowly, not in surrender but in silent defiance. And his next words made every soul in that restaurant shiver. "If you pull those triggers, you'll regret it for the rest of your lives." The tension was unbearable, the kind that stretched seconds into eternities. And Victoria realized she was gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes locked on the boy, because somehow, in some impossible way, this boy wasn't just a bystander. He was the key, the reason these men froze, the reason fear and recognition battled in their eyes. And though she didn't yet know his story, she knew one thing: her life, her empire, her understanding of power was about to change forever. And as the orchestra instruments lay scattered on the ground, as the guests trembled and prayed, as the masked men faltered, the boy prepared to reveal the truth of who he was. A truth that would shake not only the billionaire, but the entire room to its core. And that was only the beginning of the night that none of them would ever forget. And if you, dear viewer, are gripped by what happens next, if you want to uncover the shocking identity of this boy and the fate of the billionaire, in the face of danger, make sure you don't miss the second chapter of this story. Because trust me, what's coming will leave you stunned. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on that notification bell and stay with us for the next part of this unbelievable journey. The silence inside the grand restaurant was so heavy it felt like the air itself was pressing down on every soul present. The chandeliers above flickering, softly as if even the lights were trembling in anticipation of what would unfold. And all eyes remained fixed on the teenage boy standing tall in front of the billionaire, his chest rising and falling slowly, his calm demeanor clashing violently with the chaos that had erupted only minutes before. And Victoria Langford, who had built her empire on calculated risks and ruthless decisions, suddenly felt powerless, her fate seemingly bound to this boy whose presence alone had forced four heavily armed men into hesitation. And it was in that paralyzing moment of uncertainty that the boy finally spoke again, his words soft yet echoing like thunder across the silent hall. "You want her, but you'll go through me first." And his voice carried a weight, an authority, a familiarity that dug deep into the memory of the masked gunman. And though none of the other patrons understood, the way the men shifted uneasily told a different story. One that whispered of recognition and fear, and Victoria's sharp eyes caught it instantly, because she knew the body language of fear better than anyone. She had seen it in boardrooms, courtrooms, and battlefields of business where fortunes and lives alike were decided. And now she was seeing it in the way their fingers wavered on their triggers, in the way their breathing quickened under the suffocating black masks. And her mind screamed that this boy was not ordinary. No, he was something more, someone tied to a story bigger than her empire. And just as she was about to demand answers, the leader of the attackers spat angrily. "We don't fear you, boy." But his words lacked conviction, and in the next heartbeat, the boy answered with chilling precision, "You should, because I know who sent you." Those words cracked the air like a whip, and the billionaire's eyes widened. Because if the boy truly knew who orchestrated this attack, it meant he was more than just a passerby. It meant he was connected to the underworld of secrets, betrayal, and revenge that surrounded her life. And for the first time in years, she felt a twinge of unease gnawing at her carefully built walls of confidence. And as the guests crouched in terrified silence, the four men exchanged panicked glances, and the leader barked out a curse. "Shut your mouth." But his voice broke in the middle, betraying the crack in his armor. And suddenly one of the gunmen, the one standing closest to the boy, lowered his weapon just slightly, whispering to the others, "He's telling the truth. Look at him." And it was in that instant that Victoria saw it too. The resemblance, faint but undeniable, in the boy's eyes, in his posture, in the very aura he carried, the resemblance to a man long thought dead, a man whose name had haunted the corridors of power for years. A man who had once challenged her throne in the corporate and criminal underworld alike. A man who had vanished after a betrayal that Victoria herself had orchestrated. And the realization struck her like a blade. This boy was his son. Her lips parted in shock as she whispered under her breath, "Impossible." But the boy turned to her with a gaze that pierced her soul and said, "You remember my father, don't you?" The billionaire's blood ran cold because she did remember. She remembered every detail of that night. The deals, the deception, the moment she signed the papers that destroyed him. And now, standing before her, was living proof that her past had not been buried, that it had returned in the form of a boy who carried not just the bloodline but the fire. And suddenly, the pieces fell into place. The attackers hadn't come for her wealth. They had come to deliver revenge. But what they hadn't expected was to face the son of the very man they once betrayed. And that son now stood between them and their target, embodying both vengeance and redemption in equal measure. And the room grew colder as the boy continued, his voice like iron. "My father may be gone, but his legacy lives in me. And I won't let you finish what you started," the leader growled in frustration, his weapon shaking, torn between orders and fear. And Victoria, watching in stunned silence, realized she was witnessing a story that was bigger than her power, bigger than her empire. It was a story of blood, loyalty, and justice. And for once in her life, she wasn't the one holding the cards. She was a pawn caught in the storm of two forces colliding. And in that collision, everything she knew about control was shattered. Because the boy didn't move like a victim, didn't speak like a child. He commanded the room like a king. And when he finally stepped closer to the gunmen, daring them to pull their triggers, none of them did. Their hands trembling as though chained by invisible shackles of guilt and memory. And one by one, their weapons lowered, the tension breaking not with a bang, but with the deafening weight of surrender. And the leader, his mask hiding his shame, spat on the ground and said, "This isn't over," before signaling his men to retreat. And in moments they were gone, leaving behind shattered glass, overturned tables, and a room full of stunned elites who would forever whisper of the night. A boy stopped bullets with nothing but his presence. And Victoria, though safe, knew she was not free, because now she had to face the truth of who that boy was and what his existence meant for her empire, her secrets, and her soul. And as the boy turned to leave, pausing only to glance at her with eyes that promised reckoning, she felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Fear not of losing money, not of losing influence, but of losing control of her fate to the hands of someone she had once underestimated. And as the doors of the restaurant closed behind him, the murmurs grew, the legends began, and Victoria knew her life would never be the same again. And for you, dear viewer, if you were gripped by this revelation, if you felt the chill of truth and the fire of destiny in this tale, then don't miss what's coming next. Because the story of power, betrayal, and redemption is far from over. And the only way to stay with us on this journey is to subscribe right now. Turn on notifications and join us as we continue uncovering the shocking truth that lies ahead.